I am Reverend Brian Ferguson. I have the vast honour of serving this community, and now it's a time for all ages. But usually I do it from there, but I've been replaced by a table and 9 candles. So if you ever want to figure out how you replace a minister, a big table and 9 candles. That's all I do, but that's for the new member ceremony. But as Hanju mentioned at the beginning of the service, it's the Jewish New Year. It began with Rosh Hashanah and sunset on Friday evening, and it ends with Yom Kippur next Sunday at sunset. Well, actually, and next Monday at sunset. Yom Kippur starts sunset next Sunday. And this is a time in the Jewish community and the Jewish faith where they really explore at the end of the year. They look back in the last year and figure out, what things did we do that were wrong? What things did we do that caused harm? What things did we do we'd like to do better, we'd like to make amends for? And that's what this time of 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and the end of Yom Kippur, this time of looking back and exploring. And of course, we're Unitarian Universalists. We don't think we did anything wrong. We have this idea of perfection. But let me bust your bubble. We do things wrong. And last week's Time for All Ages, where I was talking about filling buckets and emptying buckets, I talked about one of the things that emptied Felix's bucket in that story was gossip. And so this is a story about gossip. And it actually comes from Eastern Europe. And it's about this Jewish man who likes to gossip. But he doesn't just like to pass on stories he hears from one person to the next. He likes to embellish stories, like I do every Sunday. And I'll probably embellish this story. So I cause a lot of harm with this. So he likes to embellish these stories, and sometimes he embellishes them so much that they're kind of far from the truth. But so he is always gossiping with all these people, and he works in this job where he meets lots of people, so he tells stories, and they go off, and they can spread it around the village. But he tells a story about this person that he doesn't really know, but he makes up this thing, and the story goes viral throughout the community. And the person who the story's about eventually hears about it, and he's really upset, because people think less of him because of what this man said. And so the victim who's been hurt by it, goes to his rabbi, his religious leader. Rabbis are Jewish religious leaders. He goes to his rabbi and says, I've heard this story is going about, and it's really hurting my business, it's hurting my reputation, it's hurting me personally. It breaks my heart, this story. And the rabbi is really upset. But the rabbi's smart. He knows that, I think I know where this story came from. He said, leave it with me and let me look what I can do about it. He said, I don't think there's anything you can do about it. And the rabbi said, well, let me see. So he calls the man in who he knows is a gossip. And he says, I was talking to so-and-so, do you know him? He goes, no, I don't know him. He said, well, there's a story going about him that really hurt him. And do you know anything about that? And the man looks, he said, well, I can't lie to the rabbi. Because in the Jewish tradition, rabbis are respected. I'm glad you got that. That's not gossip. You filled in blanks there. And so he said, well, I can't really lie to the rabbi. So he says to the rabbi, yeah, it was me that told that story. He goes, Rabbi, why did you tell that story about that man? It's not even true. He said, I don't know. I wanted to, people are always coming to me for stories, and I want to be popular, and I just feel people love when I give them some juicy gossip. And the man said, well, that's not good. He said, that's bad. He said, well, okay, I realize that. How can I make up for it? And he said, do you have a pillow at home? He said, yeah. He says, bring it to the town square at noon tomorrow. And so he said, just one pillow? He said, yeah. So he brings a pillow. In the town square, he arrives there with the and sees a rabbi, and you notice the rabbi has a big knife. So he's a little bit worried about this, And the rabbi said, "Oh, you brought the pillow, good." He says, so he takes the pillow and the rabbi cuts the pillow open and starts shaking all the feathers out of the pillow. And of course it's windy in the town square, it's noon, so it's blowing all over the place. And the rabbi says to the man, "These feathers are like your gossip. They go everywhere. The only way you can make up for it is if you collect all the feathers and put them back into the pillow. But you need to get every one." And the man looks at him and said, "That's impossible. I can't collect all the feathers." I said, "That's correct. Just like your gossip, you cannot collect and repair all the damage that you've done." And he says, "Well, what can I do?" He says, "You need to admit your fault. You need to go to the man, ask to make amends. You need to look at transforming yourself so you won't do it again. Then you need to apologize. And then if you're ever in a similar situation, you will act differently and not gossip." Well, I've decided to earn respect and brought a book up here so you know it's a serious sermon. We've got to get respect somehow. As I mentioned earlier, Rosh Hashanah began sunset on Friday, and Yom Kippur is next Sunday. And this is a time for reflection, looking back. And it's a really important time in the Jewish community, and I think there's a lot we can learn from the Jewish community regarding this idea of repentance, atonement, and repair. And this book, I didn't just bring it up to do respect, it's called On Repentance and Repair by Rabbi Daniel Rutenberg. It's our Unitarian Universalist Association common read for this year. And as you well imagine, I was reading it this week, and I thoroughly recommend it, and I think we'll have some book groups around this. It's a terrific read. Just so you know that we have a common read each year, the Unitarian Universalists. It's various. Sometimes it's racism, this one's on repentance and repair. And I really encourage you to go to the website and look at it. There's all worksheets and workshops we can follow up exploring these topics, and they're all very rich. And I think it's really important at this time. I mean, the subtitle is Making Amends in an Unapologetic World. I mean, I think we've seen the unapologetic nature of the world, whether it's on the internet, whether it's some of our political leaders whose behavior is abhorrent, in my opinion, who don't make any apologies for people they harm and hurt with their rhetoric or with their policies. And this book is heavily based in a 12th century Jewish philosopher called Maimonides. And he's got these 5 laws of repentance that this book is based on. And this is from the 12th century, and the fact that it still stands up to be meaningful is quite interesting. And some of the longer term members know I've talked a lot about the idea of forgiveness before, and the Jewish model of forgiveness was always very meaningful to me. The idea of you acknowledge a wrongdoing, you apologize, and you make amends. And that was a model that I had always worked with, and I try and work with in my own life. But this has got an even more, much better model. So as I say, we can all grow. And this is a kind of 5-stage model that Rabbi Daniel uses based on Maimonides' work. And the idea is that repentance is a process, and it's less about forgiveness. She feels that we in our North American, Western European culture focus too much on the forgiveness, the victim forgiving the perpetrator, and not enough on asking the perpetrator of the wrongdoing, of the harm, to make amends, to repair the relationship, to do the damage that's done, or as she beautifully put it, to repair, to sow the tear in the universe caused by the harm that the perpetrator's done. And she says we need to do this by first step is owning the harm that we've done. Confession, acknowledging it, and owning our part of it. And then this is a new part, and I think this is probably the most powerful part, is committing to change. Like I talked about in the Time for All Ages, once a mistake's made, there's often not a lot you can do. The most we can do for those of us cause harm, and we all cause harm, and we're all victims of harm, and we're all bystanders of harm. None of us are immune to it. We're all have harmed people that we care about. So committing to undergo change is the second step. And then the repair is that making amends. Finding out from the person we've hurt, the person we've harmed, the victim, what would be helpful in making amends. As long as we do that in a way that doesn't further the harm of that person. And the fourth is apologizing. And if you notice, that's a different order than the model I mentioned earlier on, the model I used to work with. You only apologize once you've actually started the amending the process. You start that work. You do that inner work first. Because apologies are meaningless unless there's real sorrow there. To be sorry, you need to feel sorry for what you've done. You need to feel sorrow for what you've done. It's not a way of just getting a get out of jail free card. So you really have to feel the sorrow for your own behavior, and then you can be truly sorry and apologize. And then the fifth step is perhaps the most important. If you're ever in that situation again, you're going to do something different. If you're ever in that situation again, you're going to do something different. And that's a really powerful aspect of it. You do that inner work so that you can be transformed. For those of us who have done harm, and again, I think that's all of us. For those of us who've done harm, we need to do that inner work to recognize it, to make amends, to really feel sorry for it, to apologize, and then to realize if we're ever in that situation again, we are not going to behave the same way. Because the best apology any of us can ever get is changed behavior. Words are meaningful, but can be cheap. But changed behavior is a true apology, and that's how we repair the world, and that's how we engage with atonement. Atonement being that process of being forgiven for our behavior. But we should never, ever ask for forgiveness. That is something that someone grants us because of our behavior, because of our transformation, because of our acknowledgement of wrongdoing. And to do that requires a lot of humility, and that would not say is a strength of Unitarian Universalists. Humility is not the sweet spot of our skill set. We have this idea that part of the purpose of Unitarian Universalism is this perfection of the human soul. We've got writers that have been talking about this for the last 200 years, this perfection of humanity. And if you're working towards perfection, to acknowledge your mistakes, it's a real battle there, and it's not a good place to be. And the great 20th century Rabbi Abraham Heschel says, should we despair because we are being unable to retain perfect purity? We should, if perfection is our goal. However, we are not obliged to be perfect once and for all, but only to rise again and again beyond the level of self. Perfection is divine, and to make it a goal of people is to call people to be divine. All we can do is to try and wring our hearts clean in contrition. To be contrite at our failures is holier than to be complacent in perfection. To be contrite at our failures is holier than to be complacent in perfection. And the other thing I like about this model of repentance and repair, it calls us to action. When we grew out of the Christian tradition 200 years ago, and for Christianity, much of repair, much of atonement, much of forgiveness is about a change in belief. Belief alone was enough for salvation. But what about action? What about repair? Belief is not enough when we have done wrong. We need to engage in action which will lead to transformation. And in our individualistic society, it can be harder and harder to make our mistakes because we think of ourselves as this isolated island. And this individualism combined with this strong influence of Christianity in our society has created this emphasis on forgiveness, an overemphasis on forgiveness, and an underemphasis on repair. And repair is where the transformation of ourselves, of our community, and of our world happens. And in the Jewish community, there's much more focus on community, on communion, on connection, and not individual salvation, like Christianity or Unitarian Universalist individualism and our strive for perfection. And Rabbi Daniel Rutenberg, the author of the book, says this: the work of repentance demands curiosity, care, and a willingness to face hard things with bravery and honesty. While we can't undo the past, we can address the present with integrity and endeavor to create a future that is much more whole than anything we can imagine from here. Create a future that is much more whole than anything we can imagine at this time. And to do this, we need to welcome. The theme for this month is welcome. We need to welcome the gift of being rebuked. Here you go. Welcome the gift of being rebuked. When we have harmed someone and someone rebukes us and said, when you said this, it harmed me. When you did this, this harmed me. When you gossiped behind my back, this harmed me. That's a rebuke that we need to welcome. Because through rebuke can begin that process of repair, can begin that process of repentance, begin that process where we can be transformed. And we do this work for three reasons. We do it because it's the right thing to do. We do it because it helps us grow, and we do it because it will ultimately heal the world and heal ourselves. And we see it, so much harm being done on the internet. And Lindy West is a feminist writer and blogger. And she is unapologetically comfortable with her body, which many would describe as fat. And someone, a troll, she's a target of a lot of trolls, masquerade at her recently dead father, criticizing Lindy, taking on this false identity of her late father. And she wrote a blog and posted it about this and how she was severely hurt. And then she received this email, and I'm going to read the email from the book. Hey Lindy, I don't know why or even when I started trolling you. I think my anger towards you stems from your happiness with your own being. It offended me because it served to highlight my unhappiness with my own self. I have emailed you through another Gmail account just to send you idiotic insults. I apologize for that. I created the paulwestdunzo@gmail.com account and Twitter account. I have deleted both. I can't say sorry enough. It was the lowest thing I have ever done. When you included it in your last Jezebel article, it finally hit me. There is a living, breathing human being who is reading this shit. I am attacking someone who never harmed me in any way, and for no reason whatsoever. I'm done being a troll. Again, I apologize. I made a donation in memory to your dad. I wish you the best. If you look at that and listen to that, it has every one of those items that Rabbi Daniel mentions as part of that repair process. The story doesn't end there. 18 months later, Lindy contacted the person who wrote that for This American Life interview. Many of you maybe know This American Life from National Public Radio. And they had a conversation as part of the show. And this is what the former troll said. He said, "As a former troll, I never told a single living human being until now that I did this. So it's good in a way to get it off my chest. It just feels good to kind of exercise these demons." Of course, this is one example of so much trolling, so much harm that's done on the internet in the world. But you could see how that person, when he was able to connect with the humanity of the person at the other side of the internet, he was able to start that process of transformation, to start that recognition of the harm he was doing. He was harming another human being. And something inside of him cared about that human being and began that transformation. And it takes vulnerability on both sides. It takes vulnerability to express someone has hurt you publicly. And it also takes vulnerability and a humbleness to acknowledge, like, I did wrong. I want to finish with another story of someone who corrected themselves. Many of you probably know Lizzo. She's an African-American singer and rapper. She's awesome. I've seen her live. I love her. And she wrote a song, Girls. And she used the line, "I am a spaz," meaning spastic. She learned, apologized. At her own expense, she redid the lyric after her friends who were ableist called her on it. And she sent this out without too much fanfare on the internet. She said, "It's been brought to my attention that it's a harmful word in my new song, Girls. Let me make one thing clear. I never want to promote derogatory language. As a fat black woman in America, I've had many hurtful words used against me. So I overstand the power of words. Not understand, overstand the power of words. I'm proud to say there's a new version of Girls with a lyric change. This is a result of me listening and taking action. As the influential artist, I am dedicated to being part of the change I've been waiting to see in the world. Love, Lizzo." Now, as an example, she did not have to do that. I'm sure people would have bought a song anyway. But she recognized her position of power. She could also empathize with people who were hurt by that, because she'd been hurt by language on the internet and in interviews and in person. And she took action to correct it. I think that's all we can ask of anyone. And you think about the Me Too movement back in 2017. All these men who were called in the behavior and did these pathetic apologies for their behavior. "I'm sorry if I offended you." You assaulted them. That is the work of repair. These two examples I've given out, it's noticeable that they are both women. How are we men going to start taking responsibility for our actions? How are we going to do the repair of so much of the damage that we do in the world? This time of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur asks each of us to look at our own lives, to look at the damage we have done, be it great, be it small, be it on the internet, be it in person, to family members, to children, to parents. What damage have we done, and how do we want to repair? There's a model there for how to do it. Do we have the courage to do it? Do we have the humility to do it? Do we have the vulnerability to do it? Because it will take each one of those, and know that we have support in this community to do that for one another, to support us, to hold each other accountable. So we can create the spiritual practice of acknowledging a wrongdoing, committing seriously to change, seek to make amends to the person we harmed, apologize with a real sense of sorrow for our behavior, and make a different choice in the future. That might be how we can bring the Jewish idea of tikkun olam, repairing the world in some small way, by living fully and vulnerably into our highest ideals and engaging the better angels of our nature. Especially engaging those better angels of our nature when we have done harm to others.